The following is a presentation of Geekster Media.
Remember that show back then? Remember that show? Turn on the TV, time was always flying. Why did they have to end? So many shows you forgotten. Now that we've got a podcast, we can release all the shows from our hands. Yeah, will you be the most TV dudes you'll ever listen to? As long as we keep on talking sitcoms and cartoons from back in the day. Okay, we confess we're obsessed, but we got a podcast to help you remember that show. Hey there, TV lovers, and welcome to episode 14 of Remember That Show, the podcast where we revisit the obscure, forgotten TV shows of the 80s and 90s. I'm Adam Pope.
And I'm William Bruce West. We're diving into a classic adventure series this time around with The Fall Guy. But before we take the ride with Lee Majors, we have to take a trip back to our own TV-obsessed childhoods in a segment we call Theme Song. Adam, our main character tonight is a stuntman, and many theme parks have stunt shows as attractions for guests who need a break from the roller coasters and costume characters. Do you have a favorite theme park stunt show experience?
Oh, well, I grew up in Southern California, aka the land of theme parks. Oh, so many to choose from. So I saw a lot of these productions growing up. Like Universal Studios had the Miami Vice stunt show that was partially on the water. They had jet skis, they had a speedboat, and that lasted well into the 90s, way after the show. It was like 1995, and then it flipped over to Waterworld based on the Kevin Costner movie. Yeah.
Oh, someone got fired there.
So that was crazy. And then at Six Flags Magic Mountain, they had multiple Batman movie themed stunt shows. So full costumes, vehicles, all that going on. They would just update it with new bad guys when each movie came out. And then for some reason, Disneyland wouldn't stoop to having a dedicated stunt show. But they did have like a live costume Tinkerbell that would fly on a zip line during the fireworks. And I saw Mickey Mouse climb the Matterhorn and Lederhosen several times. So that's kind of a stunt. But all that being said, my favorite was at Knott's Berry Farm. They had the Wild West stunt show. And this had it all. They had high falls, they had fist fights, they had gunfire. And the premise was every time, because I saw it year after year and it was always the same. So there was a tourist is getting pulled out of the crowd to learn some stage fighting tricks, from a guy dressed as a good guy cowboy. And so the tourist, they're like, oh, where are you from? Florida. Oh, really? Yeah. Well, what do you do on vacation? Oh, where do you work? Disney World. Boo! Get out of here. They'd kick him out and he'd walk away. No, we're just kidding. Come back here. I always wanted to be that guy. Anyway, what happens is, though, halfway through, the bad guy cowboy actor, he's called the Beaumont Bear, and he goes rogue. And then the stunt show turns real. And he tells this guy, I got live ammunition, you better run. And they're going up 2 stories, they're falling off railings, all this stuff. Finally, the guy does a high fall at the end, the guy who's the tourist, and you're like, oh, and then he gets up, and of course he was a plant, he was a stunt man all along. But every time I went to Knott's Berry Farm, I'm like, we gotta go to the Wild West stunt show. But well, in your side of the universe, there were a lot of theme parks as well, but did you get to go to them?
I did, but we didn't have that. I mean, in this area, there were 2 big theme parks. The first one, it started out as Wild World, and it was like a water park. And then they added roller coasters, and Cal Ripken Jr. became their pitch man, and it was Adventure World. I went to Wild World a ton of times, never set foot in Adventure World, never visited that era, and then it became a Six Flags. I feel like it's probably the lamest Six Flags in the fleet, but that's what it currently is, in a horrible neighborhood. So I haven't even been to that Six Flags. So the counter one was King's Dominion. It's on the way to Richmond. And then in the early 90s, Paramount got into theme parks and they purchased it. So it was Paramount's King's Dominion. And that is probably the golden era of mid-Atlantic theme parks because you had like Klingons walking around and they were really mining that like Paramount was throwing money around left and right. We have a network and now we have theme parks and all this stuff and it never went anywhere. But like I guess the closest like we didn't have those. We would have like the Paramount tie-in kind of like rides and areas and sections. Like I guess the thing that always sticks out to me was I loved the Hurler. The Hurler was the Wayne's World theme roller coaster, and like it was always like the area around there is set up like Wayne's World. You've got like Stan Mikita's and all this stuff. But what was weird is I still haven't seen Wayne's World. I'm that guy. So it was like it had no resonance for me as far as like, oh, it's like the movie. It was really just like, oh, this is this magical wonderland of it's somehow attached to Wayne and Garth, those guys from Saturday Night Live that I never found that funny. But like that was my sort of like stunt tie-in. Like there we just didn't have the action stuff that you had.
Yeah, and I would just like run into people that were stuntmen. For example, like I used to manage a KB toy store, and during that time we had all these like spokesmodels coming in, like Barbies coming in. Come get your Barbie toy signed by this model, you know? And then we had a guy who was Spider-Man who came in, and that was like the biggest day of my life. Like the official West Coast Spider-Man was coming to our store. But I talked to him backstage and everything, and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, I work at Universal all the time. I do stunts. He's like, but I'm in their stunt shows like the Terminator 2, but it was like the 3D, you know, experience. He's like, I played the T-800, I'm Arnold, you know, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool.
And then you
Hollywood.
grew up and you realized that guy was doing appearances at a mall KB Toys.
Exactly.
Wasn't that cool?
So here's the thing though, let's talk about something I know you have some experience with, because you have tried to sell me on the Fall Guys like gimmick is that he has a souped up pickup truck. It's jumping over stuff. That's a major part of the show's appeal. That remains to be seen. We're going to have our conversation here, but there are so many famous vehicles in television. So do you have a favorite TV vehicle?
Oh yeah, Kit. Like hands down, like super fast Kit. Like I mean, we grew up in the era like there are a lot to choose from. Like you can find that poster or that t-shirt on any like make your own t-shirt thing. It's like we have Ecto 1, the A-Team van, the DeLorean, like all that stuff, but for me it's always Kit. I am a huge Knight Rider fan that I don't that's like the fandom I don't really talk about because it is I've mentioned before that I kind of like Benjamin Button when it comes to pop culture. Like when I was 2 and 3, I was watching Murder, She Wrote. Like I was not watching cartoons because all I watched was CBS. Like that was our network. So it's one of those like to me, Knight Rider is the era when I finally caught up to my peers. Like it's the first property where like I could go to school and kids were talking about something and I knew what they were talking about and like, oh, that's so awesome. But also like, I mean, it is a talking car that jumps over stuff. You know, like that's awesome to a kid. I've often said the biggest reason they can't reboot it is because all of it came true. All of our cars talk to us. You drive fast enough and you hit a ramp, you can jump over stuff. You know, it's the future that was realized. I've said it before, like this is our like damage control statement, but like my favorite genre of 80s television is cars jumping over shit. And that's Knight Rider, that's the Dukes of Hazzard, that's the Fall Guy, that's the A-Team. Now it wasn't their van, but they would always like aim for the tires of the bad guys, and then they'd hit like a hay bale and kind of flip over on the side. Like I love that because I'm sitting back thinking like, how many cars did this production go through? You don't just flip it back over and it's fine. Like that car's total. But for me, it's Kit. It's Kit. How about you?
It feels hard not to say Kit, but to me, because he could talk and he had a personality, I didn't count him as a vehicle. He's a character on the show. And so like for me, I could never 100%, like, even though every, you know, black sports car, Hot Wheels or Matchbox car I had, it became Kit, right? I mean, that's just what you did. But I would say you mentioned the General Lee, and, you know, despite, you know, controversial iconography now, you know, that was on the roof, which same thing then, people just didn't make a big deal about it. I loved that car as a kid. Just it's bright orange, the jumps, the yeehaw of it all. It was a good time feeling car. You're just like, you're going to see the General Lee and you're going to feel happy, to the point where at RetroCon, like I got the main cast to sign my Dukes of Hazzard Etch-a-Sketch set. And like that, I got some very special memories out of that. But there's like a whole thing there with the General Lee where you could, connect the dots. That was something I did as a kid all the time while I was watching the show. So yeah, I think it's got to be the General Lee of TV for me. I'm just like, it's just a car, but it means so much.
I hear you there. I mean, I was there with you at RetroCon. I got my picture with him. I think it was more emotionally impactful to meet those three than it was Stan Lee. Now, maybe I spent a tad more time with them, so that was kind of different. Stan Lee was more of a cattle call situation, but it's like you said, like, it's one of those things that times changed and we grew up and we realized certain things and it kind of like tainted the car and the show. But one thing was like, I was bonding with black guys in the line at RetroCon where it's just kind of like, yeah, but like, I mean, Daisy in the car. It's just like it's just like we weren't thinking about that stuff back then. It's almost like you could say like the Washington Redskins situation where it feels like more people are offended on behalf of others than the groups that should be offended. Like, I don't remember the Dukes joined the Klan. Like, there wasn't that episode, Like, it was just like, they were moonshiners. They didn't care who was getting their moonshine, just whoever helped them get away from Roscoe. So, like, I'm generally would be my second, So I'm with you there.
Yeah, the thing is, like, I was thinking of animation briefly because I was just like, Inspector Gadget's car. I love that it could just transform to a different car. It's not a sentient robot. It's not a transformer, but it would change, and that was exciting. But then the other one that I almost picked because I was really obsessed with him as a kid, but again, he's a talking character, was T-Bob from Mask, because he would turn into a little motor scooter that the kid would ride around on, And I was like, it's so cool.
He can't count because he's basically Alpha 5.
Yeah.
Like I can understand the Kit thing because you could say he's rolling AI. It's similar to that whole meme of like, do Transformers have car insurance or life insurance? Like it could go either way. But yeah, T-Bob. Wouldn't have thought of him.
Yeah, that was a stretch. So, well, here's the thing, though. Like you said, this was a style of show that was all the rage in its era, but there's even more going on here. So we got to figure out how the Fall Guy fit into this era of network television programming. We got to figure out how it got the green light. So, well, TV audiences have craved action since the beginning of the medium. In each decade, it really seemed to have a genre that flourished, right? So in the 50s, it was Westerns, it was Bonanza, it was Gunsmoke going into the 60s, right? Then in like the mid 60s, I'd say they started favoring spies, the team from Mission Impossible, those types of things. But then, also there's a sci-fi creeping in all of a sudden. So now you have explorers of the stars, like the crew of the Starship Enterprise on Star Trek. But then interestingly enough, in the 70s, really everything got street level. It got grimy. You got these detective dramas like Columbo or superhero shows like Wonder Woman and The Incredible Hulk. Or I would throw in the short-lived Spider-Man TV series, which was almost like the French Connection, but then Spider-Man's in it. Like it was a really weird tone on that show. But of course, in the 80s, now it's cop dramas, but they're flashier, they're more sleek. You got an MTV Sheen, it's Miami Vice, or a crime-solving special like Michael Knight on Knight Rider, but he has a cool vehicle. So that is where we're coming in here. So let me ask you this, though, of all that we're talking about, whether it was reruns, whether it was the shows of the era of your childhood, did you have like a favorite TV action hero, like the main character?
Once again, we're back to Michael Knight. Knight Rider is in my DNA in a way. Like, and you were talking about like the way the genres progress, but you also kind of see that Westerns never really went away. Like Gene Roddenberry always describes Star Trek as wagon train of the stars, and even Knight Rider is a Western. He's driving through the desert. He goes from town to town. He helps out a woman. He like does in some bandits. He may have sired a child and he moves on to the next town, you know. But it was like, that's what I loved about him. Michael Knight doesn't really have a personality. Michael Long, who he starts out as, doesn't really have a personality. The show is about like just a cool guy with no history or social security number driving around in a car that no one can own. It's just like, I loved Knight Rider. Now, it's like a tiered system to me because I loved all those people. Like, I loved Colt Seavers, who we'll talk about today. You know what it is? It's anything basically that Glenn A. Larson made. Like, if he made a show, I don't care how bad it was, he spoke to me. The same way, like, New Yorkers love Woody Allen. Like, Glenn A. Larson is my Woody Allen.
Like less controversial.
Less controversial, as far as we know so far. But yeah, I'm going with Michael Knight. How about you?
Well, it's interesting because going, just beyond the 80s for me, it's a show that only got one season. Technically, it qualifies for this podcast, but the 1990 The Flash series starring John Wesley Shipp was so great. Like, the cast was awesome. The sets were amazing. The effects were good for the time. It was very expensive to produce this show, but they made it so exciting to me, and it caught me at just the right time, being 8 years old when it premiered. I have it on DVD, but I recorded on VHS, and I was able actually recently, not a couple of years back, but on eBay, I got the entire series that somebody recorded on VHS. So I have like just the original broadcast. There was something interesting about John Wesley Shipp's Barry Allen. He was just, you could tell he was a good guy, but he's a little bit of a hothead, but everybody, seemed to trust him. There was all that. However, if I'm talking about a series that I stuck with because it lasted and it stuck around, then it's Xena Warrior Princess. Xena was so cool, and she was the only thing that made me even turn on the TV on a Saturday afternoon when I knew there would be nothing else on. Here's our syndicated block of Sam Raimi shows, and I lost interest in Kevin Sorbo as Hercules very quickly, but I would sit through his show as a primer for Xena, or in case it was a crossover where she was going to be on it. I'm like, okay. And of course, yes, I had a crush on Lucy Lawless. I had a headshot of her that I set away from Starlog magazine, and I had it on my binder, in junior high. I mean, that was a thing. But her supporting cast was cool. Ted Raimi as Joxer. He's goofy. He's fun. Her villains, like Callisto, like they were all really great. So just all the elements of that series, but especially, Xena herself. She was like the action hero I could count on. She's going to be cool every episode.
I can see that because I was a Saturday syndicated guy. I was waiting for Baywatch and Baywatch Nights, but the Raimi shows were on there too, and I gave up on Hercules. Like, Hercules, it got to a point where like Aeolus was more interesting, and then like, so I'm watching it for him. They kill him off, spoiler alert, but then he goes to like the Elysian Fields and brings him back, and I'm like, okay, I'll watch again. But I dropped it, but kept watching Xena. And I was watching Xena for Gabrielle. Xena was a little too for me, but Gabrielle, she was a nice, cute little dainty thing, and like, so I was there. I love Joxer. Joxer's rendition of Dancing in the Moonlight from the musical episode pops into my head probably once a week. So like, I'm totally with you there. But more than just building on the reliable action show format, The Fall Guy had a star with a built-in following and proven track record with the ratings. Lee Majors was best known for playing Colonel Steve Austin on the very popular 70s action series The $6 Million Man before starring in The Fall Guy, and viewers were ready to see more of this rugged man's man saving the day. Meanwhile, the creator of the show, Glenn A. Larson, was already a hitmaker with series like The Hardy Boys Nancy Drew Mysteries, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, other ambitious sci-fi series Battlestar Galactica, and Magnum P.I., with many more hits to come in the decade like Knight Rider, among others. Adam, Do you have a favorite Glenn A. Larson production?
Well, it's crazy because I'm so aware of his shows, but because so many of them were in the 70s, and I wasn't seeing the reruns. Like they weren't popping up. And so I was like the 80s stuff, like, yeah, I watched Magnum PI when it was on, and I did eventually start seeing some of the reruns when it came back around in the 90s. But like Knight Rider is the only one that was really there. Like it was there in my childhood. And it obviously, yeah, it hit the sweet spot. Robot car, nothing cooler than wearing a black leather jacket, having a turtleneck on. Who else makes a turtleneck look cool? Michael Knight. But like just the whole turbo boost kit, I would pretend to be Michael Knight in line at the bank with my mom. And then, they'd have those like velvet ropes and those little like shiny stands. They were reflective. And for some reason, I would stand on that and I was talking to Kit through that. I don't know what in my 5-year-old brain or whatever was thinking that was how it seemed to work. But you mentioned Baywatch. So when Baywatch is happening, I'm like, get out of those red shorts. Get back in your turtleneck and jeans, Hasselhoff. Come on. Which he did. I remember when Knight Rider 2000, when that TV movie happened in 91, we were at a family friend's house for dinner and I just ditched the meal and I ran to the other room to turn it on. I'm like, I cannot miss this. And I know you want to talk about Team Knight Rider someday, Will. So I'm sure we will have a full discussion about the Knight Rider legacy. But when it comes to Glenn A. Larson, like it's Magnum and Knight Rider, but just a little bit more Knight Rider.
Yeah. I wasn't really a big Magnum guy. What was it? I think we did the first season with Nerd Lunch before they turned into After Lunch. It was like the Fourth Chair Army. We did like a drill down on the first season of Magnum, and that was really cool because I never knew so much about Magnum. Like I knew like ladies loved him and he and his ragtag friends in Hawaii would like solve crimes. I didn't realize they were like Vietnam vets, and then like you get snippets. Like there's the meme that's always like him shooting the nun off the ladder. Nuns don't work on Sundays, but I like that show. Like if I ever get like some spare time, I want to do like a rewatch. Well, a full run through really, but again, for me, it's Knight Rider and his like constant attempts to bring it back. You were mentioning Knight Rider 2000. That TV movie traumatized me because they killed Devin. Like I'm like in 4th grade or something, and I go to school the next day. Like, can you believe? I think that was like my TV death of Superman because they do the like montage flashbacks of like Devin recruiting Michael and all that. I'm like, I've never felt this feeling before. And like
I thought you were gonna say they kill Kit too, though. Like you didn't feel bad. Oh, that's what hurt me.
The car is iconic, but time changes. I always feel that way. If you ever find like an old National Geographic and they're showing like the hottest, like state of the art car of the time, and it'll be like power steering, power windows, but it looks horrible. It's this, they could have gotten like a Fire Hawk or something, but like I was fine with the 2000 car, but I always think back to if that TV movie had been a hit, we never would have gotten Baywatch. It's like, it's one of those like everything happens for a reason situations. Like Baywatch started, got canceled. He did Knight Rider 2000, didn't get picked up. Internationally, they're like, hey, let's try Baywatch again, and it was better for him. So it's just kind of like, for me, Glenn A. Larson, though, is always Knight Rider. Be it Knight Rider 2000, Knight Rider, what is it, 2030? Team Knight Rider 2018. Like, he is the king of Knight Rider to me.
That's the one he believes in the most, it seems. Yeah. All right. Well, we got to get into the show we're here to talk about today because this is what he took a chance on. It had some success. Hey, maybe we'll run into Glenn as we go to the top floor in our elevator pitch. The Fall Guy premiered on November 4th, 1981, and ran for 5 seasons until 1986. Now, for those who don't know, like me, the series focused on the adventures of Hollywood stuntman Colt Seavers, played by Lee Majors, who used his skills to earn extra cash working as a bounty hunter with his crew, which was comprised of Howie, played by Douglas Barr, and Jody, played by Heather Thomas. Now, in the first season, they were given their assignments via a gal named Samantha, played by a Joanne Flieger, slug. Gone after the first season. The rest of the series, it was a pre-Night Court Marky Post who was sending the team out on their adventures. And I've been rewatching Night Court and waiting for her to show up. And then I started doing some research. I'm like, oh, it was because she was on the Fall Guy. She couldn't be on it. Like, she made a guest appearance and they're like, we're going to have you back, I guess, but you've got to get you out of your contract. I was like, oh, okay. But Will, you know about this show. How did you first discover the Fall Guy?
Syndication. I had no life on the weekends at any time of my childhood. A lot of people had sports. A lot of people like hung out at friends' houses, things like that. That was not me. I played soccer a couple years, and soccer's done by like 1 p.m. We've talked about like DC local channels. Well, here, before like Fox really took hold, we had WTTG, Channel 5, and this was Saturday for them. It was nothing but like Fall Guy and Three's Company and things like that. So it's like, I didn't watch most of these classic shows in their initial runs. Because I mean, like, this launched the month before I was born. I wasn't even like cognizant before it ended, but I would say I started watching it in syndication probably about 87, you know? And it was like, that was just kind of the thing. It was, you would get like 2 episodes every Saturday, and that's how I watched it. So, I mean, I'm a little different in that I don't know Lee Majors from the $6 Million Man. To me, he's Colt Seavers. Whenever I hear like Steve Austin, there's only one Steve Austin. That's the Texas Rattlesnake. You know, like, that is not the $6 Million Man. I know more about the Bionic Woman than I know about the $6 Million Man. So it's like, this was my introduction to Lee Majors. And the weird part is like, I don't even remember Marky Post on this show. Like, I had this recent, kind of like around the time when she passed away, like this discovery of like, Marky Post was a sex symbol? Because I only knew her as like buttoned up, straight laced Christine Sullivan from Night Court. For whatever reason, my brain only retained the Samantha episode. But this introduced me to Lee Majors. I took, kind of like I've mentioned my thing with Harvey Korman in the past, like this spiritual attachment to him. The same with Douglas Barr. He was one of those guys, like, I was always rooting for him. I loved him as Howie here. I loved him on The Wizard, which I hope we have to, just for synergy of your other podcasts. And I loved him when he ends up on Designing Women. He marries Charlene. So it's just kind of like, it was full of people that, like, it was the first time I seen them and they were really cool to me, and I just followed them after this show. But it was Saturday afternoons from like 4 to 6 every week. But how about you? I guess you just discovered it.
Yeah, this is all new to me. I didn't know this show existed until probably like 5 years ago. Like, Mickey, one of the founders of the Retro Network, Geekster now, wrote about it. And I was like, what is this show? There was like one toy of the truck for the show or something, you know, like, but to be fair, like you, I'd never seen an episode of the $6 Million Man. I've seen the toys and antique malls and stuff and the Bionic Woman and all that kind of stuff. I've laughed at pop culture references to his pinging slow motion superpowers, you know, and like even Lee Majors himself, I only knew from references on The Simpsons, Marge having sexual fantasies about him. Or, you know, he's in the movie trailer at the beginning of Scrooge, you know, and it's like, it's Lee Majors. I'm like, who? I guess he's a big deal. And that's the thing. The Fall Guy, as far as I know, just never played in reruns, even, you know, on our lower end stations that were just looking to fill time, right? And I think even if it was on, it wasn't flashy enough to get my attention as a kid. So like, I've gone in not knowing anything about this series and trying to catch up, just watching episodes. You know, it's on YouTube. You can find them there. And I'm just like, okay, I'm starting to get the vibe of the show. I'm starting to understand it, but it's all new to me, just completely new.
I get it. I mean, the Fall Guy did his best to get your attention because it featured many high-flying stunt sequences in the opening credits and during the run of the series. Multiple custom pickup trucks were built by General Motors to make these amazing feats possible. It should also be mentioned that with the main characters working as Hollywood stunt performers, the series had a reason to feature many cameos by TV stars playing themselves, such as Tom Selleck, Lou Ferrigno, Hervé Villechaize, Lee Majors' wife Farrah Fawcett, and even a young Heather Locklear. But was all this star power enough to have us clapping with approval? Let's find out as we give our cheers.
my very first impression after watching, the first episode pushing play just a few minutes in, this series is much more comedic than I expected. I thought it was going to be all like macho melodrama and posturing, especially, with Colt's, he's kind of got this like practical, world weary attitude. And then he got like the spunk of Howie, who's this like nerdy intellectual. And then they get some good laughs from their banter and their differences. It feels like Colt is being put out all the time, almost like by trying to take these bounty hunter assignments, and everyone around him is kind of a nuisance. He's like, you stay here. He's always saying that. He's like, you stay here, I'll take care of this, except if they could be useful in a certain situation. So it's just fun because he's got like a grumpy dad vibe. Like, it kind of cracks me up because I really didn't think that was at all the tone of this show.
Yeah, I definitely get that. To me, like looking back at it in the humor and the mixture of the action, I start seeing it as an inspiration for other shows that I loved. I can trace like a red thread from The Fall Guy to Pam Anderson's VIP to Cleopatra 2525 to She Spies. A lot of those seem like, oh, they're Charlie's Angels ripoffs, but no, it's that balance of action humor that is hard to do well. Your mileage may vary on like what successful looks like there, but like I really do see this as like the prototype of VIP, which is a show that I love to death, and it's also on the list if any of you listeners want to stick around for that one.
Well, and it's interesting, because I did go and listen to some interviews, like some panel discussions, because like the main cast, they get together fairly often actually to just talk about the show. And you can tell they genuinely liked each other. And that comes across on screen because they talk about how like, yeah, we'd go out to dinner all the time. We're doing holiday stuff together. Like we just were together all the time. We were making the show and then off the show too. So I think that goes a long way. But, you mentioned the Charlie's Angels ripoffs, where it's kind of like a little wink. Like, we know we're just here to have fun. We're not trying to convince you that this is anything else other than a high octane love boat. It's like we're going to have all these cameos. We're going to have all this stuff going on. But Heather Thomas as Jody, like, is the real draw of the show in a lot of ways, even though she's not on every episode. Or if she is, she'll be in it like for a few minutes and then they get on without her to like a mission or something. She's tough, but she's sweet, and she looks like she belongs in Charlie's Angels: The Next Generation, right? It just feels like she was on the casting call, but that show was canceled, and so they're like, okay, fine, we'll put you over here. But I feel like she adds a little extra humor to the show because she doesn't take everything as seriously as Colt. She's just like, what? Like, let's just do it. I did particularly think it was cool. There's an episode I watched where she had to go undercover in roller derby, and Heather Thomas herself is doing the skating. Like, you could see her face like going around the track and everything. And I just thought that was cool that she was like very game for the action. In fact, it was weird. In one of the panel discussions I watched, they're like, we did all sorts of skating. We would go out together and skate for miles just on the street, just together, just for fun. I was like, that is so weird. She's like, yeah. And they talked about how like this trucker followed them for miles, just like ogling her on skates because she had shorts on. And I was just like, this is bizarre to think Lee Majors on skates at all. But he's like, right. I was there. But Heather Thomas is also somebody who I knew her from seeing Zapped on TV back in the day. And I know the full version, there's a little bit more controversy involved with her appearance and not appearance, but representing her in a way that she didn't agree to in the film. But I'd always just heard her name like in reference to hot girls of the 80s. Oh, like Heather Thomas. Oh man, and I'm like, I don't know who that is. Finally seeing what made her a star, I guess, for a while anyway. Like, the sad part is, like, I started kind of reading up. It's like she got hooked on cocaine during the show. And then like afterwards, like she gets her addictions under control. She marries the guy who's in charge of like the cocaine addiction recovery program. And so then she said like she gets out of the spotlight to avoid stalkers. She basically just raises her kids, but she's a writer and kind of a producer trying to get stuff made here and there. So it's just kind of interesting where her career took her. But I think she's just a highlight of this show in a lot of ways. Again, even though she's not there all the time, I expected her to be there more often.
Right, right. And I mean, like, first off, it was the 80s, so it wasn't cocaine addiction. It was called partying. She just liked to party, and that's okay because it was the 80s. But no, like, I don't think we can talk about this show without mentioning the unknown stuntman, because that is the name of the theme song, which is sung by Lee Majors, but a lot of people think it's just cheesy. I like a song sung by the star, and I like how meta it is. Like, he's singing about how he has like swapped in for these famous people and the like hits and like licks he's taken for them, but he doesn't get to kiss the girl. And it's kind of interesting in that, like, is how the other half lives, because this is what a stuntman goes through, but he's never been on that side of the table as Lee Majors. I like meta things. I love the song. I have used that as work music, just looped for 8 hours because I'm insane. But like, it's not a bad song, especially when you factor in it is sung by the star. Like, usually those things, they don't succeed, but I think it's a classic TV theme song. So that's a cheers for me.
Yeah, again, like I had never heard that before. So I'm just like, when I learned it was Lee Majors, I'm like, this is pretty impressive. Yeah, it just sounds like a contemporary for the time kind of country pop song. They really believed in it though, because it's a long opening credits sequence. They do the whole song and you're like, what? Like this,
Yeah.
every episode, it just goes and goes. It's like 2 minutes or something. I'm like, that's big.
Not in syndication.
Oh,
There's every show of that era has the syndication edit, but that one definitely does.
now, the other thing we have to point out is that the stunt sequences on this show, they are top notch. They didn't skip. They didn't say, oh, he's going to be a stunt man and then just do a car chase every episode. Like, because either it's meant to be part of a movie set and they're doing their job, or it's part of the mission and they're using their skills, but like it could be as over the top as they want and they could justify it in either setting. And it's just a day's work for Colt and this team, you know? But yeah, the variety is great because like something like the A-Team, it gets really repetitive after a while. The style of stunt, just everything that's happening, like, okay, he's just rappelling down a cliff, but that's cool. There was one where there was like a biplane and he's shooting a stunt for the movie and he's got to like climb out on the wing and then it dips down into the water and he's getting like dunked in the water. And obviously it's not Lee Majors, it's his stunt double doing everything, but it's all real. And I'm just like, that's great to see actual, you know, real stunt work being done at that level week after week after week and not getting bored. Because I probably watched maybe like 10 episodes to kind of get caught up. And so what I saw, I was just like, I'm very impressed by this.
Right, and they're practical stunts. They would never make this show now. This show would all be green screen. And it's like we're supposed to be impressed. But like they were the kind of thing that I'd love to see it on the big screen because it was fascinating just on like a 32-inch television, you know? But like another jeer I had, and we kind of talk about this, where we've gotten too smart for television. And this might seem contradictory in terms of how I feel about other things. Like in my comics, I need continuity. In my like MCU, I need continuity. I need to know these things are related and they're going somewhere. But in my TV of this era, I want something where I can watch any episode and like I'm not missing anything. I don't need to know anything. This was the era of there was no character development throughout seasons. Big events only happen in season premieres and season finales. But within the other 20 episodes of that season, anything could happen. You could show them out of order. That's why syndication was made, where you could strip these shows in any order to fill a hole in a channel schedule, and it provided entertainment that didn't have this deep mythology. Because, I mean, we didn't have Google. We had TV Guide. If they couldn't explain it in those 2 sentences in TV Guide, it wasn't necessary for the episode. So I love this show because it is the quintessential guilty pleasure of of, let me just throw on an episode of The Fall Guy. Like, you don't need to know anything about these people. You find out where Howie comes from in like the pilot. But other than that, like, you don't need to know he's a stuntman in training. That's all you need to know. And I miss this TV. This is why, like, people say, like, did you watch Fallout? Did you watch all this? I don't have mythology in me anymore. I watch the same Family Guys 87 times a year because I don't really need to know anything. I just remember cutaways. And so, like, this is the kind of TV I miss. And looking back on it, it has increased my love for this show.
Yeah, they definitely, each episode feels like a TV movie. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you might have a couple, episodes based around kind of a Western theme and things like that. And, or spy or something, but they mix it up enough that you didn't necessarily feel like, oh, okay, I've seen this before. You don't really like have a love story brewing between somebody and a will they, won't they. Kind of feel like, hey, is Marky Post going to hit on Colt? And it's like, maybe a little flirting here or there, but really nothing as far as I saw, so yeah, I think that is in its favor for sure. But we can't praise it to death. A stuntman likes to live a life of danger, and so we have to get into our jeers. Boo! 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 I do have to say this, the stuntman hook ultimately isn't enough for me. Because it's a Glenn A. Larson production, it feels to me a little too generic action show. It didn't feel like it had something extra to make it unique, just in my opinion of what I was watching. For example, I was just thinking in my head, I was like, what if Howie was an animatronic robot created for a movie and he was programmed with rudimentary AI, so Colt felt bad for him, saved him from the scrap heap, and he became his sidekick? Okay, there's something.
But 80s robots are the Rocky 4 robot. They wouldn't look like Howie. You got Small Wonder on the brain.
Well, it's just like Glenn Larson always had like a sci-fi element. I feel like Magnum PI secretly had a bionic mustache. We just never heard about it. But like, even if it was more grounded, the thing that I felt like I wanted maybe was like, what if Colt had more of a Charlie's Angels style mystery bail bondsman who bailed him out? He was like wrongly accused of a crime and he blackmails Colt into the bounty hunter lifestyle. Colt's trying to earn his freedom throughout the course of the show, like working towards something, because right now it just feels like it's a nuisance, but he's like, fine, I'll do it, and I'm just like, what if he had more stakes involved? I felt like there needed to be one more thing about it. But then I understood, like you say, we're too smart for TV now. They just want it to be fun. But yeah, I felt like anything else, a little something else.
But there is more, because like you're looking at the stuntman angle, but he's a bounty hunter. That's what's getting him into like the weekly adventures. He's always chasing down Terry Kaiser, who I swear played like 13 different villains on that show. So it's just like you got the stuntman angle. But I get it. I mean, this is one of those like I'm too close to it to have jeers. Like I'm sure, like I know it's not the perfect show. I guess my whole thing is kind of what you're talking about, where Colt Seavers isn't a well-rounded character in that he's just over it. Like you're saying, like everything seems like a burden to him. Everything is just kind of like, fine, I'll do it. But I don't know, looking back on it, I'm kind of like, that's not a terrible thing, because of like we've had the same action heroes recycled throughout the years. Because one thing that always kind of struck me is like he's got that old-fashioned like Western charm of he's not chasing skirts. He respects a lady, he'll tip his hat to her, but he ain't got time for that. He just wants to smoke a cigar in his tub with his hat on. So I'm just kind of like, I sort of miss that. But I can see how that's not the most exciting thing to bring in viewers. Like if I was 13 at the time, I'd be like, this guy's kind of old and boring, and Heather Thomas is only in like 12 episodes this season, that kind of deal. But like as like a 7-8-year-old, as long as the truck jumped over something, I was good. But yeah, like they could have done more with Colt. I don't think it's the nature of like the show needed something else. I think it comes down to like maybe a recast.
He's the reason it lasted 5 seasons. Like it has to be Lee Majors. If it was anybody else, that's what I'm saying. I think it's missing an element for the show to work.
I wonder who else could have done that.
Yeah.
Like Alan Alda. Like you always hear, you hear those things of like, who was almost Han Solo? And you're like, what, Christopher Walken? So it's like, Lord knows who screen tested for this show. But I hear you.
Yeah.
There could have been a dash of something.
But let me ask you this too, because this was my feeling. I messaged you before we recorded and I just said, I didn't make it more than halfway through any episode. I feel like the hour-long format is too much, in my opinion. And I know that was kind of the standard action show length at the time, but I feel like they could have told the same story in 23 minutes. In fact, I went and looked. I was like, was A-Team a half hour or an hour? It was an hour-long show, but it always felt like that show just moved. And there's something a little bit protracted about the stories in The Fall Guy for me. Like, I felt like I have one less fist fight. Have one less, like, Howie is chasing a girl again. Like, because he's always interested in some girl in the episodes, So, like, I would lose my interest in the story at the halfway point. I'm just like, I'll switch to a new episode.
I get it because it is as formulaic as Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Like, you can set your watch to it. Like, if you really just want to watch the truck jump over something, you tune in at about like 35 minutes in. Like, you knew where everything was going to fall. So like week after week, you really do kind of have to love this cast because they're not bringing you anything original. Like, you're watching for the cast and who might cameo. But you're right in that, like, it is gonna drag. The excitement is Colt doing the stunt, then it drags from like him getting his assignment and doing like the groundwork. And then there's a chase. And once the chase happens, things start picking up, but you're already halfway through the episode. So, like, in this day and age, he'd get an email about his new case, and we wouldn't have to go through Marky Post dropping by, and they're back and forth. But I get it. Like, a lot of these I've found that a lot, where it's like, I have bought the DVDs of shows I loved, and then nowadays, there are shows that will turn me away. Like, I'll find it at a thrift store, and it's kind of like, I'd kind of like to own Punky Brewster, but I don't want to watch every episode of Punky Brewster. I forced myself through like the first season, and that was a chore. And she was like America's darling in like 1984, but just times and sensibilities changed. So like, this doesn't play well today, but we were a slower people back then.
Yeah, I think that is definitely of its time, and it worked in that era very well. Now, you mentioned Marky Post earlier, that you forgot she was on this show, and that was my criticism too, is like, she doesn't add anything to the show in my opinion. Like, because I've been binging Night Court, I can see what happens when she has really good writers, when she's given something to do and she's part of a great ensemble. But on The Fall Guy, she always seems to be just outside the core group. She's there, she's providing exposition, she's given background on the skip, but otherwise she feels just kind of shoehorned into the plots because she'll just show up. Like, I remember there was one where they go to this resort and then she just shows up to talk to Colt in a bikini, and you're like, what are you doing here? She's like, oh, I had to give you more information. I was like, you probably could have called him. Like, it was just weird. Like, she would just show up but never really, like, again, she's adding details to the plot, but she's not bringing a dynamic to the show that necessarily makes it more fun or more interesting. And I was just like, that's not on her, that's on the writing. Like, what do you do with this character?
I haven't done my research, but I would say, based on like how you saw that, and like, it sounds like it was probably a talent holding deal, where it was like, the network wanted to be in the Marky Post business, and this is where they found a sticker. It was just one of those things of, they needed somebody to fill this role. Joanne Flug or whatever decides she wanted to like buy a farm in Montana or whatever and like give it to Marky Post, And like, you can always kind of tell those characters. In the Mad TV episode, we were talking about Nicole Sullivan when they shoehorn her into the King of Queens. So like, if there's ever a character who's not really meshing with everyone else, and you're like, why are they here? Probably a talent holding deal, especially if they're hot. Like,
well, there you go. Well, Will, did you have any more criticisms, or are we looking to see what we can do with this patient? Stunt guys get hurt all the time. We got to bring him back to life, maybe.
I have no more jeers. I am more than ready for what comes next.
That's right. We are going to show up to set as the show doctors. All right, so obviously, the elephant in the room. There's a Fall Guy movie in theaters right now. Ryan Gosling taking over, becoming this generation's The Fall Guy. The more I hear about this movie, the more I want to see it. I'm a Kiss fan. Kiss's song, I Was Made for Loving You, apparently is like a part of the soundtrack all throughout the movie. I gotta see that. And I started hearing about these other cameos and things they're putting in this movie. And I'm just like, I gotta get to theaters. And my wife is interested. So she likes Emily Blunt. What does she like Ryan Gosling from? I was just, we saw Barbie. She loved Barbie. So yeah, so I was like, we gotta get out there and see it. But that has not, tainted my view of why did this show disappear seemingly? Like you said, it was running in syndication in your area, but even in conversations, it's so rarely brought up as a show that people like revere and remember, I feel like, at least in my circles. So do you feel like it needs a reboot like the movie and like be a series, or do you think it could have gotten a new life and a new generation in, the 80s? Like what's your thought process on the Fall Guy?
I'm so glad you asked, and you just stepped right into my web. You see, prior to Remember That Show, on my website, I toyed around with this concept that I called Reboot That Bitch. And I only got through 2 shows. And it's weird how like you write this stuff and you think like, oh, that was a couple years ago. Like getting ready for this, I looked back, this was a decade ago. Like I wrote this 2013, but like I started with shows that meant a lot to me, which is why I only got through 2. I did Fall Guy and I did Three's Company, and I rebooted them in the modern day. Same concept, just with recastings. Like, who in this day and age can recapture the soul and spirit of what this classic show was? Three's Company is a classic. This is a classic to me. But, like, you're mentioning the movie, and the thing with that is, like, I love everyone in that movie, but that's not my Fall Guy. I don't like unintentional heroes, because that's what that is. It's like he finds himself in a situation where he has to use his stuntman skills to get out of a jam. That's not the Fall Guy. The Fall Guy deliberately inserts himself in these things to pay his bills. It's the intention is different there. So in my mind, in 2013, it was a different era in TV then than it is now. I mean, that was when you could still think about, hey, let's reboot Knight Rider, So like this is a little more lax. I don't think you could do it in 2024, but you could have done it a decade ago. So I recast the thing. In my mind, Colt Seavers would have been Michael Bean, however you want to say it. Kyle Reese from the Terminator. At this time, he would have been about 57, which was about 10 years older than Lee Majors was when he held the role, but he had the Hollywood pedigree of like rough and rugged. He never had the fame of Lee Majors, but he has the cult following of a Lee Majors because of Terminator and like the genre films he had done. I almost went with Greg Evigan of My Two Dads fame, but like I felt it was Michael Bean, but I said that if he turned it down for whatever reason, I would go with Baywatch's David Chokachi. There was just something about him that also would have gotten the job done. Howie Munson. There's a guy who's been like poking around Hollywood for a while. He's not a household name, but if you've seen his face, you know who he is. His name is Kyle Bornheimer. And at the time, he had done an NBC sitcom called Perfect Couples with Olivia Munn and the waitress from It's Always Sunny. But like, if you look at him, you're like, oh, that's Douglas Barr's illegitimate son. But he plays those characters of like, kind of like goofy, but loyal. And you can see him being like attempting to be a stuntman, but he's never gonna make it. He's more heart than like fight, he's a lover, not a fighter. This is the controversial pick, but it's gonna bring all the boys to the yard because The Big Bang Theory was not as huge then as it would go on to be. So Jodie Banks would be Kaylee Cuoco, because at this point she had done Charmed, she had done Big Bang, but it wasn't just this phenomenon yet. So I felt like they could afford her. Like she would be number one on the call sheet. She would be in whatever edition of Maxim is going on at the time, but like she has like an odd sex appeal to her. She almost had the kind of vibe I said of like if you ever watched Maury, she was kind of like a sexy decoy in the green room. So like that's what she would bring to the show. The only thing I would keep the same is the truck, because even though I say that you can't bring those classic cars into modern interpretations, I don't think that truck is glued to a particular era. So, like, I think visually, you still have to have the truck. I'm hoping Michael Biehn can sing, because I would have him re-record The Unknown Stuntman. But, like, as far as, like, 10 years ago, I think that had about 3 seasons in it. That's how I envisioned it. I felt it had the right star power. It was never going to be a huge hit, but it would get some people paid for a couple years. This isn't a 7-season show. Like, it just isn't. I mean, you're pushing it at 5. That 5th season negotiation, everybody's getting like $1 million an episode. It's just like they can't make the economics work at that point. But like, I think you could have rebooted it for 3 seasons, just as kind of like, hey, remember when they brought back the Fall Guy? Kind of like Murphy Brown, where no one remembers how they brought back Murphy Brown for a season. Yeah. It would be one of those shows. So that is my show doctoring. It was the same now as it was a decade ago. This is my modern day Fall Guy.
Kaylee is Jody. I love that. I think I'm a little more optimistic that it could work in this day and age, but it's going to be a complete retooling, and you would be decrying my pitch on social media, let me tell you. But let me explain. We live in a post Dog the Bounty Hunter world where that reality TV star made it feel like bounty hunting is the business for mulleted rednecks who look like the cousin of wrestler DDP, Diamond Dallas Page, from WCW, right? So that being said, I'm a big fan, and I mentioned this to you off the air, of a very fun show that was on Netflix and only got 1 season. It's called Teenage Bounty Hunters. It's about a pair of twin sisters in high school, and they force their way into working with Kadeem Hardison, of all people, in his bounty hunting business, and hilarity ensues. It is so quirky and fun. So I feel like there is a way to keep the idea of a bounty hunter adventure show fresh. You could do something with it. The problem is something else you mentioned earlier, Will, that stuntmen these days, like if they're not in a John Wick sequel that's being directed by a stuntman, like mostly they're working against green screens or they're being replaced altogether by CGI creations, right? So the setup for big, dangerous stunt set pieces in Hollywood, it feels unrealistic in the modern entertainment industry. So I applauded the humor of the Fall Guy, but I say we need to embrace the comedy fully and turn the Fall Guy into a partially scripted mockumentary series called The Fail Guy, from the makers of Reno 911. Why? Because the eyes of the world nowadays, they're on YouTube and TikTok videos showing clips of people attempting stunts and failing in painful and embarrassing ways. So seeing this, I'm imagining we have this Colt Seavers. He's an out of work stuntman because the industry has changed, and he decides to become a bounty hunter for reasons. But he's going to use his skills to set elaborate traps for the skips. And for people who don't understand how bounty hunting works, it's people get arrested, then they pay a bail bondsman to get them out, but then they're supposed to like repay, right? But they would take off. They're skipping town, and that's what the bounty hunter has to go bring them back. So the idea is that he sets the traps and then they fail, by getting caught, and they're providing content for his YouTube channel, but he's failing just as often. So the comedy, I think, comes from the clash of egos and personalities between the star bounty hunter, Colt Seavers, and his squad of amateur bounty hunter recruits, right? And they have a cameraman. He dreams of being an Academy Award-winning cinematographer, so he's obsessing about lenses and lighting and blocking on a reality TV show. So they're having conversations. Or there's going to be a deaf sound guy. He lost his hearing in a big explosion on a film set, but he's in the union, so they can't fire hire him, and he's terrible with the sound, you know? Then they have a social media manager. He's a high school junior, and he's always trying to create memes in the middle of their missions, you know, trying to get him to get on board with this and like knock it off. Plus, I want there to actually be a Reno 911 crossover baked into the series. So it is in the universe. We observe a rivalry between the bounty hunter crew and the inept cops from Reno 911. And they pop in not every episode, but every couple of episodes. And they claim they're upset that the fail guy is messing up their arrests, but really they're just jealous that he's more popular online than they are. You'd have all the wacky characters. The draw, ultimately, if you need one thing that's going to be on social media as the clip from the show, it's there always would be hilarious but kind of cool, like Rube Goldberg-esque trap sequences that fail or work, but either way. So the fail guy, it's streaming on Peacock fall 2025, which means no one will see it and it won't get a DVD release. But there you go. It was a moment in time.
All right. I like that. You thought I wouldn't like that. But see, the thing with it is when you said mockumentary, that means a lot of different things nowadays. So I wasn't sure if we were going with The Office or if we were talking about something that would be on True TV. You know, like, are we doing The Office or Impractical Jokers? Like, or Jury Duty that was on Prime Video where, like, not everyone's in on it. It's like some actors and some real people. But now that I know we're leaning towards The Office, or rather, Reno 911, I love it. I think that's really the social media aspect, the influencer aspect, the fails. That's what works today.
Well, good. Hey, the Fall Guy. I finally know about it. I mean, I feel like most of the shows we've talked about at this point, I had a history with. So to come in new to something that is so like, you know, it has its history, but to me, it was a blank slate that I now have some concept of the show was great. It was very fulfilling. So I'm glad we picked it. I'm glad the movie gave us a reason to talk about it. But Will, what's coming up next?
Next time around, we'll be talking about a one-season wonder called ER starring George Clooney. Nope, not the one you're thinking of. This is from 1984, and it features a bunch of familiar faces in a very forgotten workplace sitcom. So stay tuned.
Yeah, this is very interesting, and we'll give you the whole history behind why we picked this show when the time comes. It's a little bit of a crossover with a different podcast, but yeah, this is another one. It's a case I'll just tease right now where neither of us knew about this show. This was new to both of us, and we're like, wow, we have to talk about this. So we will get into that conversation on the next episode. But thank you so much for checking out this episode. We hope you enjoyed our discussion of The Fall Guy. If you want to add in more details or talk about your favorite episodes or what we missed, then you can find us on social media. I'm at Hoju Coolander on all the socials. But Will, where can they find you?
You can find me on all social media at William B. West or my website, westweekever.com.
Yes, indeed. So until next time, we're changing the channel.
This has been a presentation of Geekster Media.